From your world news headquarters on the World Wide Web, it's time for your daily dose of sanity. This is the Meria Heller Show. Meria Heller is a published author, founder of the Universal Wheel, a lifestyle and philosophy based on our interconnectedness to all living things, a Reiki master, and delivers the news with spiritual views. How many intuitive news decoders, animal rights activists, and vegetarian broadcasters are there? Just one, Meria. Meria has provided independent news for a smart audience for over 13 years now on the Meria Heller Show, available at Meria.net. MERIA.net. And now, here is your host, the mouth that roars, Meria Heller.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. Sorry for the time delay today, but something in the universe wasn't going to let this show happen, but here it is. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest. His name is James McCanney. He is a physicist. He is a mathematician. He received his sound classical physics training at St. Mary's University. He got a Bachelor of Arts degree with a double major in physics and mathematics in 1970. He was then offered full scholarships to 3 major U.S. physics graduate schools to pursue his studies, but he chose to postpone that for 3 years to travel, and he taught physics and mathematics in Spanish in Latin America. And during those 3 years, he spent a good deal of time traveling to ruins of ancient cities and archaeological sites, studying firsthand many times as the ruins were dug from under dirt that hadn't been moved for thousands of years. And then with the understanding of archaeology, astronomy of the ancients, physics, and the world around him, he went back to graduate school in 1973 and earned his master's degree in nuclear and solid state physics from Tulane University in New Orleans. He's got many books out, a tremendous body of work. You've probably heard him on other people's shows. You'll be hearing from him again on this one. Check out his work at JMCC. S for Sam, CI.com. There's a live link right here on site. Let me say good morning to James. Good morning.
Morning, Meria. Morning.
How are you today? It looks like nobody slept last night, and I'm assuming it was the meteor storm last night and tonight.
Yeah, equally with me. I did not sleep. I went to sleep at my normal time, and I slept maybe an hour. And I woke up and my eyes are wide open, and sometimes I could even read one of my own books to put me to sleep, or a physics book or something, but not last night. I was wide awake. And what I realized is that this has to do with the stars and what we call the stars, but really the electrical conditions in the solar system. And when this happens, many, many people have the same. I talked to a lot of people and I go, yeah, I didn't sleep last night either. So these are conditions that affect us, and they're related to many times the positions of the planets, because we are connected electrically, Earth that is, electrically to the rest of the solar system, and that's part of my work, is to explain the electrical nature of the solar system and the universe.
Right. Well, I had gotten several calls from people and said they were waking up like every hour on the hour. And I said, well, it must have something to do with this meteor storm, which I understand is passing over us tonight as well. Are you the one that coined the term, the electric universe?
Yeah, that term came out of one of my papers when I was at Cornell University in 1979 to 81. I was a low-level faculty member there. I was teaching physics and mathematics, introductory courses there, and probably one of the only people there with a master's degree. But they liked me because I was bilingual, and they needed that. I wrote a book when I was there, a very large book, dealing with the electrical nature of the solar system. And then part of that was republished in some papers around 1981. And in the conclusion of one of the parts of that paper, I said, this would lead us to believe that we live in an electric universe. And so that's where that term came from. It was kind of one of those phrases that would stick in people's head, and I used that to promote my work, because what I've learned is that in lecturing and talking to people, and through the ages, for whether I've been in the electronics industry or my own work or lectures or conferences, people leave with one thought. And I want to, you talk for an hour or 2 hours, and you want people to leave with a thought, a particular thought. And that contains a lot of what I talk about, the electric universe. It's not a static, what comes out of the standard science community is kind of a static universe. It all began 4.5 billion years ago, and the swirling dust cloud and all the planets supposedly formed, and then the Big Bang 13 billion years ago, and really not a lot has happened since. And that's not my view of the universe at all. My view of the universe is it's extremely dynamic, constantly changing. Electricity contributes a significant part of what goes on. So the electric universe concept is something I started, and I have to warn people, if you went and searched on the internet, you'd find a lot of quackery around that particular topic. People that have no degrees, have no background, and they're trying to copy my work. So it's like anybody trying to make a buck off somebody else's wave. But that term, and then also another term I coined is action at a distance.
Right, action at a distance was very interesting to me when I was reading. I so far got through almost 2 of your books, but in one of them, when you were talking about action at a distance, it started to really make sense to me. It's interesting because right before the show, I was watching CNN, and Obama has prepared and is delivering this climate change speech on, the oceans are rising and the heat and the drought's going to get worse and fire danger's going to get worse and we have to prepare for it. But he said, of course, it was because of what we are doing to the environment. I'm assuming he never read your work and didn't get that, what happens at a distance is what affects us here.
Yeah, the sun controls our climate and weather and everything on a minute-by-minute basis. And so what Obama is doing, and I should remind people that Obama is not really the president. He's middle management. Mm-hmm. He's the middle management in the European banking scheme. He's more an appointed president than not. And all of Congress is really bought and paid for it. I mean, the agencies and all of this work in a structure, and then we have a lot of greedy corporations that hover around the government, just like Thomas Jefferson predicted. But the Obama is just doing the bidding of the World Bank, and what they're doing is through climate control or climate change, so to speak, if they can convince people that this is due to you driving your SUV up and down the street, then they can control, they can tax, they can make you think that the government is in there fighting for our welfare when really it's like Obamacare. Obamacare wasn't about giving you good health care. It was signing up 8 million people who are extremely desperate for medical care, and everybody else is going to have to pay for it. That's what Obamacare is.
Exactly. A boon to the insurance business.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's all he's doing is throwing another dependency on the people that are lucky enough to still be working out there and have a job.
Right.
And but it's driving this country into third world status. Mm-hmm. But the way I explain to people is that imagine that all of a sudden right now the sun turned off like a light bulb. It would be, let me put it this way, when we go into nighttime, that's basically what happens.
Right.
The sun turns off. And so we drop, 20-degree temperature from nighttime to daytime, and then we come around and we warm up again. Well, that's nice. But if the sun turned off for good, the second time we came around, we drop another 20 degrees and then another 30 or 40 degrees. And within a week, we'd be in the deep freeze and be going downhill very fast.
Well, it kind of reminds me of that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, where everything goes into a deep freeze in like a week span.
Right. Right. And so the idea of long-term climate change is absurd. And when the sun hiccups a little bit or puts out more energy, right now we're getting a tremendous amount of UV, ultraviolet light from the sun, and less of the kind of heat that heats Earth. So even though the sun is a bit more active, it's moved up on what they call the black body curve. We're getting less of the energy that comes in the visible light and heats up Earth, and that's why we had this unbelievable winter the last 2 winters. We're really going into global cooling. Mm-hmm. And so what the politicians have done skillfully is to go from climate global warming to climate change. And so if it gets colder, they're right. If it gets warmer, they're right. Mm-hmm. But the end result is control.
Right. Well, people have predicted for years that, they would try 2 ways of, if war doesn't work, they would try 2 other tricks on the human race. One would be, blame it on the climate, climate change, let's all pull together. Or, we're having an invasion of aliens and spaceships. I'm still waiting for that one.
Yeah, the War of the Worlds in Obama style.
Right. Now, you had said something in one of your writings about a new moon passing and how that affects storm systems on Earth. Do you think we're ever going to get to normal, what we used to think was normal weather again?
Well, we are having what we would call normal weather mixed in. First, I want to mention that there is weather control going on, weather manipulation. Uh-huh. And the military has, for a while, has had the ability to manipulate, control storms, move hurricanes. And I want to qualify that by saying they don't create weather, they simply manipulate and control weather systems that are already there. Uh-huh. They can augment them, they can create conditions. But it's hard to imagine what really is normal. And this comes back to when I was doing my theoretical work at Cornell. I had my hands on real data that was coming back from spacecraft around the solar system at that time, back in that era. And what was clear was things were changing very rapidly. The solar conditions, and what I proposed, and I've subsequently been proven correct, is that the sun's fusion, the heat engine of the sun, is up at the surface of the sun, at the atmosphere. And this is a controlled fusion, but it's not at the core. Standard physics and standard historical science has stated that the sun's heat is generated deep in the core of the sun. There's a fusion reaction, and that the heat slowly migrates out in the form of X-rays. And when it reaches the surface of the sun, you have a perfectly smooth, glowing orange ball. And so that's a great theoretical model. That worked fine up into the 50s and 60s, but when they started to examine the sun in detail, the surface of the sun is wild. It's got all kinds of activity, and this is not commensurate with the core model of the sun. So I said, the sun has its fusion up at the surface, and if so, then a number of things can happen. First of all, comets that come by can affect the sun, and they can affect the fusion of the sun. The energy of the sun is variable. That means tomorrow it might be a little more or less than today. In over a 10-year period, it's going to change. And so we've been in a state for maybe 2,000-3,000 years when it's been fairly stable, but we've also had periods where the sun would go quiescent for 20 years, the Maunder minimum in the Middle Ages. We appear to be possibly heading into such a cooling cycle right now. But the sun is variable, our climate conditions are variable, and it's not caused by you driving your SUV up and down the street.
Right. Well, what do you think about HAARP and chemtrails? They do admit to geo-engineering. People can look at the U.S. Patent Office to see how many patents they have for it. Do you think that somehow they're actually trying to stop the sun from cooling or solar dimming?
I think that these people, and first of all, chemtrails are real. About 10 years ago, I did a lot of radio on chemtrails. There were a few of us out there that were really promoting this concept that the chemtrails are real and what they're trying to do. But make no mistake about it, every day they are spraying chemicals into the atmosphere. And there's indications that they're also spraying biological agents, whether it's for some type of genetic engineering or modification or public control of some kind. I really don't know, but it's very real. In Atlanta, about a week ago, they put up a billboard trying to bring people's attention to the fact that there's what they call geo-engineering or climate control. This is happening. And so when you talk about HAARP, that's a radio transmitter that transmits up, it bounces off the ionosphere, and they can redirect it down into the chemtrails and cause various conditions. There's another system, I had quite a bit actually to do with developing it. I worked with Russian scientists in the mid-1990s, and we were looking at atmospheric conditions, electrical conditions in the atmosphere, and the Russians had noticed something on the sun, very strange. Every now and then you would see tornadoes. They had equipment that could magnify, like telescopes, but they could see the conditions on the sun, and there were literally tornadoes running across the surface of the sun, big tornadoes. We're going, what is going on there? And I said, well, that's confirmation of my electric concepts, that these are electric conditions on the surface of the sun. And so the point was that they confirmed this aspect of the sun. They also confirmed with a very simple experiment that the core of the sun is planet-like and it's very cool, that they could actually measure down into the atmosphere. But going back to HAARP and weather control, what we learned how to do was control hurricanes with a laser satellite. And this information, we tried to present it to the U.S. Military, and they took it and turned it into basically weather warfare. It was back around 2003 or 4 where the Russian scientists went to the United Nations and said, we want weather control treaties because the United States has this technology now, and they're using it to basically, it could be used as weather bombing another country.
Right. Well, couldn't they be using that right here in the United States to,
Well, they have been. They have been. Katrina was a controlled storm. There's no question about it. The storm that occurred this past week in the United States, it was centered around the state of Iowa, and it sat there for 4 days. It was completely contrary to any type of weather pattern. The hub of that storm, the arms of the storm, kept sweeping across southern United States, and they would exaggerate those storms. We could see the fronts of those storms being dotted with lasers from outer space. These are big laser satellites that are in outer space, and they can pinpoint areas and create storm systems. They can enhance the storm systems with laser satellites by discharging the ionospheric capacitor down to the storm system and drive them into big storm systems. And that's what was going on for 4 days.
Right.
That storm just sat there and spun and spun and spun. And it was amazing because even before the weather system started, the weathermen were saying, we're in for more, folks. We're in for more. And I'm going, where is this coming from? Because I understand how the sun works, the solar energy works. And I looked for the solar conditions that would be driving these weather systems, and there wasn't any. There were not any natural causes of those storm systems. It was fairly man-made.
Right. Well, doesn't it make you wonder, though, if we have such severe drought in California that they're telling us, how much the price of food's going to go up, that they would steer that water to California and not dump 24 inches on Florida?
Well, let's go back to Obama's speech and about weather control. You will notice when they do this, the thing they always put in there is that they have to control water. And the whole issue with, we watched the big high pressure cells they built up off the western coast of California all winter long. I was watching those. There was like a wall. The weather systems from the Pacific that normally come in and feed the rain systems of California were being blocked, and they spun up and then went all the way up into Alaska and then dumped down across Canada and into the central U.S., where they had all the tremendous amount of snow this year. But that you could see them blocking those systems, and what was the end result? Drought in California. The farmers are using underground aquifers to pump water onto the crops, and they're going dry. So this is about water control, and when you can control the water, you control everything.
Well, yeah, and they'll also control the price of food. It's like problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, and then they give you the solution. And that's the unfortunate thing. You know, with technology, you would think we would advance to actually use technology for good. But when we come out with a new form of technology, it always seems that it's used for war or as a weapon.
Yeah, exactly. When back in when oil was first discovered, the use of oil, it was around 1200 AD in the Middle East. The oil was in lakes and pools on the surface of the ground, and it was crude oil. And so they started using it and learning how to refine it. And the very first use was for warfare.
Right.
You would bundle it in big balls of twine and shoot them or roll them down hills at the opposing army or whatever. But eventually they learned how to refine the oil, etc. And then they learned, after they used up all the oil that was at the surface, they learned it was just underneath the surface there was a lot more. And that brings us up to the day where they're drilling and procuring oil from underneath.
What do you think about them doing that? What do you think about these tar sands projects? Because from what I read, they use more water to try to get the oil out than it's even worth.
Yeah, the fracking and the other processes are extremely damaging. It really is. It's really creating a worse than a desert in Canada. The tar fields there. If you look at the biggest oil deposits on Earth, like the Orinoco region of Venezuela, if they burnt the amount of oil that's in that flow area, the tar and oil, it would consume all the oxygen on Earth. It's something a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about global warming or trying to control oil. There's no indication that we're going to ever let up on the oil usage. They're still, using oil as a form of energy when we don't have to use it at all.
Well, why do they refer to oil and even coal as fossil fuels? Are we to believe that all this oil that never seems to run out is coming from dinosaurs?
Yeah, it's so absurd. It's so absurd. The concept of fern forests and dinosaur bones causing oil. If there's anybody out there that still thinks that that's true, then please show me the chemical process that transfers decayed plant matter or dinosaur bones into vast quantities of oil. And then how did it get under the Atlantic Ocean? How did it get up off of Alaska? How did it, how did it get into the tar fields of Canada or into this vast region in the Orinoco region of Venezuela? It's just, how do you turn decaying plant matter into oil?
So is
That's
oil
a wonderful process.
Is oil a finite substance?
No, it's a major component. There are literally oceans of oil around the earth. And probably 15 years ago, I knew some geologists that worked for oil companies who were being laid off. They were being laid off because they had identified so much oil, so many deposits, and identified where they were and exactly the quantity, and they knew the techniques for getting that particular type of oil out. There was so much oil, they didn't need geologists anymore. They had more, it would be like living in Arizona and wanting sand.
All right.
Let me see. Do we need to hire 2,000 geologists in Arizona to identify sand? No, you have lots of it. You don't need them anymore.
Right.
And the oil is the same. The worldwide deposits of oil were immense. Chavez, Venezuela, stated right now you can buy gasoline in Venezuela for 16 cents a gallon. He said he would export raw or refined gasoline to the United States. He said he could supply everything we need into the future for 50 cents a gallon. Well, why do you think he's placed on the axis of evil list?
Right, exactly. Of course, because that's not enough profit, I would assume. Let's get back to if the universe is electric, and I remember seeing so many shows and things called the body electric. That would mean that we too have an electrical field, and yet we're swimming in all kinds of Wi-Fi and electrical waves 24/7. So what's happening here?
Well, yes, your body is an antenna. It literally is an antenna. And we live in a vertical electric field that's incredibly large. A lot of people don't realize this, but we're surrounded by atmosphere. And that atmosphere is what we call in electronics, it's called a dielectric. If you had a capacitor and you wanted to make your capacitor you wanted it to hold more charge at the plates, you would include a dielectric. Well, our atmosphere is a wonderful dielectric. But we have a 300 volt per meter electric field, vertical electric field from the ground up to the ionosphere. It's a tremendous electric field. And so from a 6-foot man has 600 volts between his feet and his head. But there's very little current because we're surrounded by this dielectric atmosphere. But if you penetrate through that atmosphere, if you can, this is what I was saying before about laser satellites. The laser satellite can shine down through the atmosphere, ionize a path, and all of a sudden now you have a tremendous amount of energy that can come down that path, breaking the capacitor essentially. You can drive that energy into a storm system like a hurricane or a tornado, like all these tornadoes moving through the south. And I'm not saying all tornadoes are created by Dr. Strangelove sitting in Colorado,
right,
mountainside over there. No, they've just learned how to manipulate storms. And I cannot figure out yet why they were weather bombing. And really the bulk of this went around a location near Pensacola. All of those other areas were hit, and then Oklahoma was hit relatively hard. In addition, Oklahoma had 10 earthquakes in a period of 2 days.
I know, it's crazy.
And this is man-made. This is not, due to. That was the only place in the southern United States. Along with those storm systems, you had 10 earthquakes in Oklahoma. Somebody is doing this. This is man-manipulated, man-made activity.
I guess we have to then try to figure out what do those states have or what's in that area that they want. With Katrina, it looked, I could understand afterwards where you had, a lot of property that was valuable, but there were a lot of African Americans living on it. Some of the towns that were run and pretty much owned by African Americans wiped out. No storm damage where the rich white people live. Now those same towns have nothing but white people in control and the value of the property is up. I don't want to say that I'm a conspiracy theorist about everything, but after doing the show for 14 years, James, I have to tell you, I think everything is a conspiracy now unless the government proves different.
It's interesting when you talk about that. 2 weeks before Katrina, Bill Clinton got together with Donald Trump and wanted to get ready to start building a giant complex in New Orleans. And very interesting timing.
Right.
Those people are at the level where they know that these type of things are going on. When Katrina was still out in the Atlantic, very far out in the Atlantic, the oil futures were going wild. because the word had already traveled through the financial community because New Orleans is the 5th largest seaport in the world, which is hard to believe, but it is.
Right.
A lot of shipping goes on there, and the majority of oil that comes into the United States from the Mideast comes into New Orleans, and it goes by a pipeline over to Texas, where then it's refined. But a lot of people don't understand the value of the Port of New Orleans.
Well, obviously somebody did. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the movie Why in the World Are They Spraying by Michael Murphy. But he definitely, shows you how the market bets on these things in advance, and then who's making the money on it. So if you haven't seen it, I certainly recommend it. I mean, his work is great on chemtrails, but that one's a winner because you start to really think, when I see a disaster now, James, I say, okay, who stands to make money on this? And people still want to live in the illusion that our government cares about us. They don't get that they don't care about us. We're just feeders, useless feeders in the way.
Yeah, then, and when I talk about Obama, I want people to, sometimes people think, oh, I'm a Republican. And it's like, no. You have to understand that no matter who's in that little dog and pony show we call the presidential election is a facade. It's because the guy that gets in there is going to do the same thing. It doesn't matter whether it's Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton or George Bush Sr. or Jr. or whoever they put in there next. Those people work for like I say, they're middle management. And it goes up the ladder. You see who really controls this country is the Federal Reserve. I saw an interview many years ago, it was Barbara Walters, who's, excuse me, but my opinion is not the brightest bulb on the tree, but she's interviewing Ronald Reagan. And she asked him, she says, well, something about the economy. She said, well, why don't you just go over there to the Federal Reserve and tell them to fix it? And Ronald Reagan goes, he says, well, the Federal Reserve, he's very courteous, he says, the Federal Reserve is an independent institution, and I don't have any control over it at all. And she goes, well, you're the president, and she has no clue that it's the opposite way. The Federal Reserve goes over and tells the president what to do.
Exactly.
And he was in the politest way he could, explaining to her that as president, he doesn't have anything to say about the banking and what goes on in this country.
Right. So would you say the top of the food chain worldwide are the international bankers, the Federal Reserve, and all its central banks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My water book, it's called Water. It's not a fun facts book about water. It's about the control of water, but it also goes into the hierarchy of control in the world today. And this may be a little bit of a shock to people, but basically in the Middle Ages, a group of the Jews were being persecuted in Spain. And they were either going to have their eyes gouged out and killed, or be converted, or would have to leave. And some left, but the ones who stayed became an order of Jesuits, and eventually they formed a secret society below the level of the Catholic Church, and eventually worked their way up to where they controlled the entire church worldwide. This was in the Middle Ages, and we all know that the papacy controlled wars, they granted marriages, they controlled the alliances between countries, and etc. This went on for hundreds of years, but during that time was the invasion of what we now call the Americas, the Mexico and the Peru, and the unbelievably vast amount of gold that was taken in ships back to Spain and England and ultimately transferred to the Vatican. In the Middle Ages, the Rothschilds family, which was a banking family in Europe, became the key keepers to the Vatican banking system. They started loaning out worldwide, and they learned that controlling the wealth and banking of the world was instrumental in starting wars, and they kept up the same thing, which was used originally as God as overseeing the wars and the marriages and the alliances. Now it was the banking system. And that banking system saw us through the Russian Revolution, The Bolsheviks won over the Mensheviks because of the influence of the Rothschild banking in Russia. The Tsarists were moved out. They moved into the United States after the American Revolution. Make no mistake about it, the American Revolution was about banking. That was to throw the European bankers out of this country and start our own financial and banking system and prevent taxation on the individual. In 1913, all that went asunder when the banks got back in here, started individual taxation, started the Federal Reserve banking system, and the rest is history. The wars, 1917, 4 years later, we're in World War I. Gee, what a surprise.
All right.
And we had wars and wars and wars ever since.
Well, and continuing on. James, we're going to take a short break. When we get back, I want to get over and cover action at a distance so people can understand what's going on here, especially since we have so many crazy people out there always screaming about the end of time. So stay with us. James and I will be right back.
Wow. One solid hour of commercial-free information thanks to you. The person who wants truth has the integrity and understanding to support it with your donation and subscription. Meria believes people can handle the truth and delivers it tirelessly with those with ears to listen. 14 years on the net. Won't you take a moment right now to commit to a subscription of your choice at www.meria.net. That's MERIA.net. Over 1,100 hours of pure education all in one place, 24/7 and all downloadable. Knowledge is power. Sharing that knowledge is wisdom. Together we can change the world and create real hope. Now let's get back to the Meria Heller Show.
Okay, welcome back. I'm speaking with James McCanney. I have a live link here to his website, jmccsci.com. James has tons of books out. He talks about being prepared because, listen, I say it all the time, we live in an anything can happen world. James, action at a distance. I don't remember which one of the books I read of yours where it talked about that, but it was like a bulb went off in my head because I think about, I have talked about with other guests on the show, that we're in the middle of a sixth mass extinction and people that worry about an EMF going off and so many things. And of course, the entire world has stories and legends and lore of the Great Flood. Reading Action at a Distance, and when you describe the Great Flood in your books, it first made real sense to me. And what I got from it was that we don't need a comet to hit the planet. The comet's tail just needs to be close enough to create that kind of havoc. And I could actually visualize everything on Earth getting sucked up when that happened. Am I right? Or are you right? I mean, did I get it?
All right, we're both right. The issue with Noah's flood, people have been trying to. The issue is, they put a religious connotation on it, which is good, but in my way of viewing, I see what happens in the universe as God's hand or Creator's hand, because this is the way things work. Mm-hmm. There are forest fires that devastate forests, and the end result is regrowth and very vigorous regrowth. A terminal forest has stagnated. It's not going to change, and so the fire comes in and rejuvenates it and brings new growth and change. The solar system is the same. A hurricane comes into an area and devastates it, and all the plant life comes growing back up instantly. And in 10 years, you don't know there was a hurricane, but the plant life is more vigorous. The same thing happens in the solar system when large comets come through the solar system. And you have to understand, if you look at standard science and what NASA tells you, etc., they have a motivation that's somewhat handed to them. Their agenda is to make you think that the universe began 4 billion years ago or whatever, and that nothing has happened since. And all these little incidentals like Noah's flood oh, that's just, it rained for a few days. No big deal.
Right.
No, it was 40 days and 40 nights of torrential rain around the world. The ocean levels rose 600 feet. And this is physically measured. It's not, something that you read in the Bible. The coastlines rose between 200 and 600 feet. So the earth went through some serious changes, and the influx of water, it's all over the world. You find scientists that work for the government, they always want to find some other thing. They said, oh, well, this land dam broke over by the Mediterranean and it flooded the Mediterranean Ocean. And so that was Noah's flood. Well, wait, Noah built an ark. Do you think he was so stupid? He said, okay, I think this, how did he know that the land dam was going to break? And do you think he was so stupid that he built his ark down in the floodplain? I mean, nothing they say makes any sense at all. It was 40 days and 40 nights of torrential rain. We just saw torrential rain through the American Southlands. Pensacola region, it had 22 inches of rain in one day. Imagine that for 40 days and 40 nights. The roads washing out. The water is tremendously destructive. It destroys everything. But Noah built a flood, and how did he know this? I mean, Noah built an ark. It was about 600 feet long, about 2 football fields, according to the measurements. And he packed all these animals in there. He didn't do this overnight. This was not a weekend warrior project.
Right.
This was major amount of work. And I have to say, I liked the recent Russell Crowe movie. I'm glad they paid attention to Noah's, the story. But I thought it was too much like Lord of the Rings with the rock people, protecting the ark at the end and all of this.
Well, I haven't seen it, so I haven't seen it yet.
I don't think it's going to be an Oscar award winning, although I really liked a lot of the things they did there. But a lot of the other special effects, I don't think was true to the story, is what I'm saying.
Right.
But be that as it may, there was a lot of parts to that movie that were very good, like the water gushing up out of the ground. When the rains came, back then the aquifers under the ground were full, and when that pressure came down and filled the lakes and everything, the water came shooting up out of the ground, and it's literally what would happen. So, I mean, a lot of these things are explained by physical processes if you have rain. And there was a large population prior to that on Earth, and it was pretty much completely wiped out. So, and there were other parts of the world that fared and where people lived through it. Noah was in the Mideast. The Chinese up on the Tibetan Plateau. That's why that area has 2 billion people today, because it came out of that disaster with a certain population that could grow much faster, that beginning population, whereas the Americas had pretty much nothing. We're totally wiped out. But the end result is that if you look at history, there was a flood, and it was caused by action at a distance. We moved through a comet tail for 40 days and 40 nights, and that was where the rain came from.
Do you think something like that could happen again? I have a friend, he's in his 90s now, and he was an archaeologist. And one thing that I remember him telling me for 20 years ago was he really felt that the Earth would be taken out one day by a comet or a meteor. He was surprised it hadn't happened yet.
Well, one thing I want to clarify, and this is important, is that whenever you hear a NASA story or standard science, they're always talking about something hitting Earth. And really, the probability of that is much smaller than something coming by. And second of all, typically they've over-exaggerated the effect of something hitting Earth. Earth is very pliable. And so if something hit Earth, it would be a localized event. A lot of that energy would be absorbed locally. And not to say that the whole Earth wouldn't be affected, it would. But it's very much over-exaggerated, the computer modeling, etc.
Right.
But the idea that things can come by and never hit us is important, and they never, ever want to talk about that. That's what my work is all about, is that the big damage comes from objects that come by that are big.
Well, they've convinced
gravitational.
us, James, they've convinced us forever that comets are just huge, dirty snowballs. Well, after reading your book, I know that's not true.
Yeah, that's one of the most ridiculous theoretical statements ever is that comets are dirty snowballs. Let me just give a quick example or counterexample. Jupiter has 4 big moons. A couple of them are covered with ice. Those moons are out in the solar wind, right in the region where comets would be very prolific and very active, and with the solar wind or whatever they're saying would happen, and we don't see a trace of ice coming off of those. They would have lost their ice long ago by this so-called dirty snowball comet model process. And they don't lose any. When we go to the surface of a comet, actually send a spacecraft out there and take pictures and sensors and measure, there's no water or ice or snow of any kind on the surface of the comet. It's dark, it's hydrocarbons baked on at high temperature. And so where in the world does this water come from that we see in the tail of a comet? Well, that's what my whole process explains, that the water is coming from a region. These are electrically charged comet nuclei. They're discharging the solar capacitor. And what I did is I discovered the physics of all of these processes. The tail material is coming into the nucleus, and then the small comets that we see, they don't have enough gravitational mass to keep that matter that's brought in, and then a lot of that gets blown out in the solar wind as what we call neutrals. They're neutralized, the ions are neutralized, they combine with electrons, and they blow away in the solar wind. And so scientists with satellites measure these neutrals, and they think, oh, that's coming off the comet nucleus. But you get to the nucleus, there ain't no water, there's no snow, there's no ice. So, and it should look like a steam locomotive pouring water and ice or water off of the nucleus,
Right.
and there isn't any. But they come back and they say, well, it's just a little dirtier than we thought. And but they can't grasp this idea that they're just totally wrong.
No, of course not. Jim, hold on. We're going to take a short break.
I'm sure you're enjoying the information you're hearing on this episode of The Maria Heller Show, heard internationally at Meria.net. Did you know that Meria does 4 shows a week and has over 1,000 hours of excellent informative shows on her site? Maria's been at this for years, and you get the benefit of the best education anywhere for a subscription of choice. Your subscription gives you total access to the entire site, the archives, and the new shows, all without any commercial interruptions, thanks to the show being supported by those who appreciate the truth. The site's available 24/7, and all the shows are downloadable for your favorite device. Enjoy the second half of this show and then come over to Meria.net, that's Meria.net, and pick a subscription of your choice. It's a win-win for all of us. Now back to this excellent show.
Okay, welcome back. And again, you will want to check out James' work, James McCanney. I have a live link here to his site. James, you talk about a lot too, and I did surf your site quite a bit. You talk about preparedness. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there, oh, buy all your gold and silver and get a whole bunch of canned food in your house because the end of the world is coming. What do you mean by preparedness?
Preparedness is the same no matter what event might happen, whether it's man-made, economic, or some major physical event on Earth, major, say, earthquake. Right now we have a possibility of Yellowstone crater erupting. I mean, there's earthquake activity there. So, I mean, you don't know what the emergency might be. It could be a power outage. It could be a martial law. It could be something in your area. It could be like down south where you get severe weather for a couple of weeks and all of a sudden you're out of power. It's going to be 3-4 weeks. It could be 6 months. It could be 2 years, or it could be never when the infrastructure comes back. being prepared means being able to live at many levels. Like, I don't go and live in a cave. I'm one of the better prepared people on the planet. I've lived in the northmost part of Canada throughout a winter outside without any shelter.
Oh my.
I've lived in the tropical jungles. I've lived, away from things, and so I know something about being prepared. And the first thing is just keep your head about you and keep calm, but knowing how to deal with things. You have to use your preparedness, whatever you have. In other words, don't just buy stuff and put it in the closet. You have to be prepared. But water is the first thing. You need your own independent source of fresh water. What does that mean? That means to go out in a river or stream or a puddle out in the street and be able to put that through some kind of filtration system and have clean, fresh water. If you see any disaster, the very first thing they do is they have to somehow get water in there. Second of all is food, then shelter, shoes. How many people have extra shoes, that would last them 2, 3, 5 years? Very simple things. But the whole idea of preparedness is not to be nuts about it or go live in a cave or whatever. But here's the trick. You have to be able to change gears, so to speak, on a second's notice. And so go about your daily business. If you got a good job or if you're living or if you're retired or golfing, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. But on a dime's notice, on a second's notice, you might have to change back to extremely basic living. Imagine yourself in your house with no water, no toilet, no electric, no gas, whatever your energy source is, and what are you going to do?
Right.
If you can't answer that question, you are not prepared.
Right. Well, I always suggest to people, just for the heck of it, when I first moved to Arizona, I didn't know anything about Arizona, James. I grew up in New York, in the city. And what I did do is I won't even say it was a survival course, but this Native American was teaching a class on basically the topography of the desert. Which plants can give you water, which plants are safe to eat, how to provide shade, how not to dehydrate in the desert, which plants, if you just put a sprig of it in your mouth, it'll keep you hydrated. To me, I think that was one of the most important weekends of my life. And I suggest to people to learn the environment that you live in. Okay, even if you're in the city, you have to have parks and open fields somewhere away from where you're living. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I have things on my webpage like I call it the week calendar sun star clock. One of the first things you're going to lose is time and calendar. And this is a device that allows you any place in the world to rebuild the calendar and the clock. So what is that useful for? Well, if you're going to have to plant in the springtime, you don't want to go out in March when you think, oh, this is springtime, and start planting your seeds, the only seeds that you have, and really then it snows again.
Right.
You have to know what time of year it is, etc. So there's a certain aspect to preparedness. But the first thing is water. The second thing is food. What are you going to do for food? And believe me, if things happen, the big government-sponsored truck is not going to come down, park in front of your house, and unload all kinds of stuff for you.
No, we saw that in Katrina. I mean, those people were left to die.
Yep. So you have to be able to take care of yourself and your own people, and don't worry about somebody laughing. There's always going to be somebody, you're one of those conspiracy preparedness,
Right, extremists.
TV shows about the nutcases that are preparing. So they don't want you prepared.
Well, of course not. Well, James, I have to tell you, this was quite an interesting show, and I love your work. And I know you sent me a whole bunch of your books, but I don't have your book on water. So now you got me all interested in the book on water.
I will make sure I send that to you right away.
Okay, and I look forward to us doing this again real soon.
Very good. Always feel free to give me a call anytime, and we absolutely will.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. James McCanney, and you learned a lot today, but let me tell you, his body of work is huge, and there's nothing he doesn't know. he looks at science and everything so differently, which is probably why he was ostracized from the community, who 20 years later finds out a lot of his theories were correct. So let me know how you like today's show, so I'll know how soon to get him back on the show. Again, tomorrow we'll be back with Stars Are Us. We're going to look at the other things that affect weather, which is pretty much similar. Astrology, Stars Are Us with Joe Anthony. So until then, have a great night, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for listening and supporting The Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. Always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.